Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. It's really a pleasure to be here today. So in these 10 minutes, as mentioned, I will briefly explain what the WTO Agreement on Fisheries Subsidies is, why it was created, and how it affects small-scale fisheries. So the key idea is simple. It is an international agreement designed to stop harmful subsidies that lead to overfishing and to make fishing more fair and more sustainable. So as a reminder for those who may not be familiar or have little experience working on international cooperation or international law, an international agreement is essentially a formal agreement between countries. And these treaties set rules and obligations that governments must follow in their national laws and policies. In this case, the WTO Agreement on Fisheries Subsidies is a treaty on how countries can and cannot provide public money, that is subsidies, to their fishing sectors. But the first question to ask ourselves is why this agreement was concluded. What is the problem that it's trying to address? And around the world, governments spend tens of billions of dollars each year on fisheries subsidies. And some of these subsidies are beneficial, such as those supporting research, safety, or resource management. But many of these are harmful. So they make it cheaper, for example, to buy fuel, to build bigger floats, or fish more further from the shore. And this increases fishing capacity and puts pressure on fish stocks. As a result, more than 1/3 of the world's marine fish stocks are overfished. And small-scale fishers are often the first to feel these consequences. There are lower catches, rising costs, and there's an unfair competition from large industrial fleets. Now, as mentioned already in the introduction, when was this agreement concluded? It's worth noting that this agreement took more than 20 years to be negotiated, and it was finally concluded in June 2022 at the WTO's 12th Ministerial Conference in Geneva, and it entered into force very recently in September 2025 after 2/3 of WTO members formally accepted it. So the purpose of this agreement is essentially to end harmful subsidies and to protect fish stocks for future generations. But what does the agreement say? Now, as you can see in this slide, the first thing to think about when we are trying to understand an agreement is the scope. What does this agreement cover? And the agreement applies only to fishing that takes place at sea. This means that it does not apply to fishing that happens in river, lakes, or fish farms. And it really focuses in particular on subsidies. So on the public money that governments give to support marine wild capture fishing and related activities at sea. So for example, those subsidies that are for fuel or vessel construction. Now, the second question to ask ourselves is, who does it apply to? And the obligations under this agreement are on governments, not on fishers. But the way governments will implement the agreement will affect small fishers directly. Now, what are the core rules? Essentially, you can see in the slide, there are three main sets of rules with certain prohibitions. The first rule is on, it establishes that there shouldn't be subsidies for illegal fishing. So this means that governments cannot give subsidies to any vessel or operator that has been officially found to engage in illegal, unreported, or unregulated fishing. And this means that public money cannot reward those who are breaking the rules. Now, the second set of rules is no subsidies for fishing overfished stocks. So if a fish stock is recognized as overfished, governments cannot subsidize fishing of that stock unless there are certain measures that are put in place to rebuild this stock or to maintain this stock at a sustainable level. So the idea here is to stop paying for fishing that harms or puts more pressure on already depleted resources. And then there is a third set of rules that are other subsidies. This set of rules also have a prohibition that is no subsidies for unregulated high seas fishing. So subsidies are banned for fishing on the high seas or areas that are outside the control of any regional fisheries management organization. So these are essentially areas that have no proper conservation rules. But also the agreement contains two obligations for governments, establishing that they need to be really careful when they are providing subsidies in two specific situations. One of those is when the status of the stock is unknown. So when there is no data or there's no assessment done, countries must be especially careful when they are subsidizing. And also countries must be careful when they are subsidizing vessels that do not fly their own flag. So really this last set of rules, they target those situations where we are not sure about the impact of the subsidy, so we need to be specifically careful. And then the agreement also contains other cross-cutting or horizontal provisions on transparency and special treatment. These transparency obligations, for example, are on countries. They need to report detailed information on their fisheries subsidies to the WTO, which will allow for greater transparency, and it will help identify where harmful subsidies still exist. And also special treatment for developing and least developed countries, which allows them to have certain flexibilities. So for example, these countries may continue to provide subsidies within their exclusive economic zones for a limited period of time until they build a stronger management systems. But over time, the idea is that all countries are expected to phase out harmful support. But then the question that we must ask ourselves is, what does this mean for you? What does this mean for small-scale fishers? And this agreement, I want to clarify and to highlight that this agreement is not against supporting fisheries. It is only about redirecting the support towards sustainability. So this agreement it can reduce unfair competition from large industrial fleets that benefit from fuel or vessel building subsidies and fish in the same waters as artisanal fisheries. And over time, it can help also to rebuild fish stocks, making fishing more secure for future generations. So in the slide here, you see how the WTO agreement can translate into concrete benefits for small-scale fisheries. First, by improving how subsidies are designed and managed. Second, also by reducing harmful and unfair practices that deplete fish stocks. And third, by creating a more secure and sustainable livelihood for artisanal fishing communities. But the extent of these benefits will really depend on each government's commitment and on the next phase of negotiations that will be explained by my colleague Tristan. But I wanted to really clarify what comes next. So now that the agreement has entered into force in September 2025, each government must do two things. First, they must review its existing subsidy programs and adjust national laws to comply with these new rules. And a second round of negotiations is ongoing to address remaining harmful subsidies. So as it was already mentioned in the introduction, implementation will only succeed if small-scale fishers and coastal communities are involved, and this is why this conversation is so important. And to conclude and to close, I wanted to mention three main things to take away. The first is that this agreement is a global treaty concluded in 2022. It entered into force in 2025, and is the first sustainability agreement concluded at the WTO, aiming to stop most harmful fisheries subsidies that lead to overfishing and illegal fishing. And as mentioned in the introduction, your engagement is really crucial to make sure that this agreement works for you and your communities. Thank you for your attention, and I'll give the floor now to Tristan.
Thank you very much, Flor. That's a very useful overview of the Fish One agreement. And so what we will briefly look at together now is what is often called Fish Two in the context of the WTO. So this concerns the ongoing negotiation of additional rules on fisheries subsidies, rules that could not be concluded when the agreement on fisheries subsidies was concluded in 2022. And so why is there a need to negotiate further rules, right? Why is Fish 1 not enough? That's because the agreement on fisheries subsidies and its rules are essential, but they are very targeted in nature. And that's because they focus on specific situations, on the most alarming situations. So we've seen with Florencia, when there are identified cases of illegal fishing, when stocks are assessed and they are assessed as overfished while no management measures are in place to rebuild those stocks, and also when fishing happens on the high seas outside the competence of any management arrangement. So in those situations, subsidies are prohibited already under Fish 1, under the Agreement on Fisheries Subsidies. What WTO members are currently negotiating are additional broader rules on subsidies that contribute to overcapacity and overfishing more generally beyond these specific situations. And so that is called Fish 2. And the goal here is really to better address the root cause of the problem, so the root cause of subsidized overfishing, so that subsidies do not lead to overfishing in the first place. So if you take the example of the rule in the Agreement on Fisheries Subsidies that applies to overfished stocks, it applies when a stock has been already overfished. So there has been excessive fishing pressure for a while, and this has depleted the stock below a threshold below which it's considered to be too low and overfished. The goal with Fish 2 is that subsidies should never contribute to reaching that type of situation. So in other words, it is to discipline subsidies before we reach the very concerning, very alarming situation of having a stock that is considered to be overfished. So that's really the objective. Now, in terms of the actual disciplines that are currently being negotiated, there are broadly two of them. The first one is a prohibition of subsidies that contribute to overcapacity and overfishing, and it includes a list of specific subsidy types that are prohibited unless fisheries management is in place to maintain the relevant fish stocks at a sustainable level. So if you look at the list, it includes, for example, fuel subsidies, subsidies for vessel construction, and other types of subsidies. But those subsidies are only prohibited if fisheries management is not in place. And then, together with that rule, there is a series of exemptions for developing countries and groups of developing countries. And so here there is a permanent exemption for least developed countries and small fishing nations. There is also a permanent exemption for small-scale and artisanal fishing. And there is a temporary exemption, a transition period for all developing countries and for fishing in their national waters and the fishing they do under regional fisheries management organizations. So that's really the main rule, right? A prohibition of certain subsidy types when fisheries management is not in place. But then it is specified that the rule does not apply to certain types of fishing or to certain developing countries. Second, the second rule is also a conditional prohibition. It is a prohibition of subsidies that are really targeted at distant water fishing, again, unless fisheries management measures are in place to keep stocks at a sustainable level. So here, the goal is really to establish a dedicated rule that looks specifically at the subsidies that target distant water fishing and that specifically support distant water fishing, so fishing beyond a country's national waters. So that's the rule here. On top of it, on top of this conditional prohibition, the rule also says here that even if management is in place, and so in that case there is no strict prohibition, then members have an obligation to really refrain to the greatest extent possible from providing those subsidies. So members, countries, when they provide subsidies that are targeted at distant water fishing, they must ensure that they have fisheries management measures in place. Otherwise, it's simply prohibited. And even if they have those measures in place, they are strongly encouraged to refrain, or they have an obligation to refrain to the extent possible. So they are strongly encouraged not to use those subsidies. Now, where are we in the process? Because I just told you that negotiations are ongoing, and they've been ongoing since 2022, when the agreement on fisheries subsidies, the first agreement, Fish 1, was concluded. And so what we've seen in the negotiations is unprecedented progress in 2023 and 2024 towards the conclusion of those additional rules. And in a nutshell, that's quite summarized, but in a nutshell, the main delegation that wasn't ready to join other members in a consensus and to agree on those rules was India. With other members also flagging a couple of issues that they wanted to see addressed, but India was the main delegation who made it absolutely clear that they were not in a position to take the rules on the table. At the moment, most countries still want to conclude the negotiations based on the latest negotiating text that's currently on the table, possibly with limited adjustments. But this currently looks unlikely because at least two major countries, India and the US, are currently calling for more substantive changes, which are not very clearly specified to the negotiating text. And so there are at least two big players who are not on board with the current approach, the current text, and there is also some level of uncertainty about a few other members. If you look at India, what they are asking for is more flexibilities for developing countries and stricter rules, including on distant water fishing. And if you look at the US, one of the things they are asking is actually the opposite of what India is asking for. They are asking for less flexibilities for developing countries. But interestingly, they are also asking for stricter rules, including on distant water fishing. So those are the big points that will need to be further discussed between members. Finally, in terms of civil society, it's useful to note that civil society is largely supportive of the agreement, but there are some concerns by some organizations as well about whether the agreement will do enough to limit subsidies to industrial fishing. So that's the very last slide to conclude the presentation, both by Florencia and by myself, just with the key next steps. So there is an agreement on fisheries subsidies that's been concluded in 2022. And so here, the next step, number one here on that slide, is to implement it. As we've heard, the agreement entered into force, and so now governments will really need to turn their minds on what it means in their domestic context and what they will need to do to align with the obligations. We'll also hear about that a little bit later, but financial support is available to developing country members for implementation. And second, the second next step is the conclusion of additional disciplines, so-called Fish 2, because members committed to continue negotiations to achieve a comprehensive agreement. And yes, the conclusion of these additional rules won't be tomorrow, so it will not happen in the very short term, But the next ministerial conference of the WTO, which will be in March next year, will be very important to regenerate momentum in this particular negotiating process. So with that, I give the floor back to you, Mr. Moderator, and we would be happy to answer any questions at the end of the session, if that would be useful.
Merci pour cette deuxième intervention qui complète la première, pour camper le débat, pour voir les contours de l'accord, les différents enjeux et ensuite les avantages et les défis qui attendent les États. Maintenant, nous allons passer la parole à Sébastien Matteux, qui est conseiller indépendant pour Sustainable SSF et qui participe activement au dialogue mondial sur les subventions de la pêche. Il va nous parler des implications de l'accord de l'OMC sur l'agriculture pour la pêche artisanale. Donc, Monsieur Sébastien, vous avez la parole, vous avez 10 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Babo. I think I'm audible to all of you. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would like to clarify that I am not speaking on behalf of ICSF. I am now working as an independent consultant, so my position is it's not representing an organization. So kindly bear with me. So can I share my presentation, Shuja?
Yes, Sebastian.
Yeah.
Nathalie, can we have Sebastian's presentation?
Yeah, I'll just share now.
Thanks, Nathalie.
Yeah, so the can I operate or you have to? So next slide, please. Yeah, so I just, at the outset, I just want to make it very clear that we are at a time when the marine fisheries has been through a lot of changes since 1976, when the exclusive economic zone was adopted during the negotiations of the Law of the Sea Convention. And we need to keep in mind the fact that many countries, especially many developing countries, are contributing to the largest marine capture fisheries production in the world today. And you can see that in terms of production, in terms of exports, their share is very high. And of the total marine capture fisheries production, 30% would be originating from small-scale fisheries. And then if you look at the employment in capture fisheries, you can see that there are nearly 16 million, and of which maybe 80 million people are coming from small-scale fisheries. So the contribution to production is 30%, and employment is very high, nearly 80%. Next slide, please. So, and I would like to also draw attention to the small-scale fisheries guidelines, which provide some kind of normative points to keep in mind when we talk about fisheries trade and small-scale fisheries. So first of all, we need to keep in mind that the guidelines flag the issue that financial measures to contribute to to avoid financial measures contributing to overcapacity and overexploitation, and that these type of financial measures can have adverse impacts on small-scale fisheries. And it talks about how to think of investment in terms of infrastructure, organizational structures, and capacity development to support the small-scale fisheries post-harvest subsector, so that they can produce good quality fish, safe fish, and in a responsible and sustainable manner. And then he talks about how states need to facilitate access to local, national, regional, and international markets and promote equitable and non-discriminatory trade for small-scale fisheries products. And he talks about how promotion of international fish trade does not adversely affect the nutritional needs of local people. So how do you maintain a balance between trade and local food security? And then to all actors to ensure that benefits of international trade are fairly distributed equitably across the value chain and to states to ensure that there is effective fisheries management systems. And then if you look at small-scale fisheries and artisanal fishing, so I think in light of the agreement that Florencia and Tristan referred to in the previous presentations, I think we need to keep in mind that small-scale fisheries as nationally defined can spread across the internal waters, territorial sea, and the EEZ. Therefore, we need to make sure that the peace clause, the two-year period, should apply to small-scale and artisanal fishing vessels and operators. And then we also keep in mind that there should be some ring fencing of small-scale fisheries, so that we are in line with primarily low-income, resource poor, or livelihood fishing in nature. So to pay attention to small-scale fishing, primarily for low-income, resource poor, and livelihood fishing, we need to make sure that some kind of a ring fencing of small-scale fisheries should be attempted, so that some kind of a universal lowest common denominator is accepted, where we talk about especially on differential treatment, and other type of categories perhaps should be seen together with any other type of fishing operations at sea. So therefore, what we are proposing is that 12 meters in length we can keep in mind, and then we should also exclude destructive bottom trawlers or whatever be the length of those vessels. So this should be one way to look at what kind of ring fencing of small-scale fisheries would be desirable from a livelihood, nutritional security, food security point of view. And then we would also like to argue that after an agreed transitional period, that all types of fishing, including artisanal fishing for low-income, resource poor, are adopting measures towards conservation and sustainable use of marine living resources. Therefore, conservation and sustainable use of marine living resources should become a common denominator for all type of fishing operations in the marine zones. Next slide, please. And then, as you can see, that WTO members are required to have laws, regulations, and administrative procedures. So I think the notification procedure of the agreement is very useful in terms of encouraging countries which do not have yet sufficient laws, regulations, and administrative procedures to think in those lines. And then the notification, then consultation process, and the various regimes related to dispute settlement can definitely lead to a greater transparency in fisheries management measures across the world. And this, I'm sure, will definitely contribute to improving the compliance with various resource management international instruments that have been developed by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, even International Labour Organization, so on and so forth. So therefore, all these kind of instruments can be activated through this process of consultation and notification. And then again, the peace clause can be used to make sure that what kind of exemption are we talking about in the context of developing countries? And then whether we can think, for example, in the section 3.3, paragraph 3 of the IPOA about what kind of unregulated fishing can take place in a matter which is not a violation of applicable international law. Therefore, subsistence fishing or certain very rudimentary type of small-scale fishing can be outside the framework, because the IUU fishing is defined as per the paragraph 3 of IPOA. Therefore, there is a provision under 3.4 which can be used to keep certain rudimentary provisions or subsistence type of fishing operations outside the scope of IUU fishing. Next one, please. And so, as I said before, I would like to see that this agreement on fisheries subsidies can be a catalyst for institutional reforms, so that we can arrive at a comprehensive approach on responsible and sustainable fishing. And we can see that the role of different coastal states, flag states, subsidizing states, port states, and market states and RFMOs are recognized. And we look forward to some kind of a coherence across different kind of regimes in managing marine wild capture fishing. And an important point, again, as Florencia and Tristan also mentioned, that outcome of such an approach could help address threats facing small-scale fishing practices from large-scale fishing operations. can encourage to maintain equitable and sustainable fisheries and open up space for greater intergenerational equity. So the community members need not hesitate from participating in small-scale fishing. They can see that more space is opened up with more responsible, sustainable fishing, and that can give hope to the next generation to see fishing as a possible avenue for their children, their grandchildren. So therefore, from an intergenerational point of view, opening up space for small-scale fishing is very important, and this agreement and its implementation mechanism and the process can definitely help us in that kind of an endeavor. Next one, yeah. So then the benefits of the agreement is that we can see that marine fisheries can be upheld as a source of sustainable source of seafood. We can maintain employment of fishers and fish workers, so resources are not collapsing. We are able to maintain employment. We can protect biodiversity towards matching sovereign rights to explore and exploit with the duty to conserve and manage them. So this balancing is very important, which is often overlooked in the international kind of a framework looking at the Law of the Sea Convention. So I think this balancing of rights and duties can be achieved using the AFS as an instrument. And then we can also think in terms of subsidies for rebuilding fish stocks can be also include social adjustment payments, social protection of fishers to be met, compensating vessels to keep away from fishing, then finding alternative target species, utilizing excess fleet capacity to assist in evaluating the state of stocks, and payment of permanent retirement of fishing vessels, for example, through buybacks. So there are all kinds of options which are very good for sustainable fishing, which can be achieved through this subsidies permitted for rebuilding fish stocks. And then we should definitely make sure that any effective management of marine living resources have an objective to benefit small-scale and artisanal fisheries to meet food and nutrition security, livelihood security, and to alleviate rural poverty consistent with the small-scale fisheries guidelines. So that's also very important to keep in mind that the larger objectives of fisheries management should also include social kind of concerns and social kind of results. Yeah, and then last slide, please. Yeah. Yeah, so therefore, I would also like to invite, especially developing countries, to make sure that the coastal states, I mean, not just landlocked states, we need to have more coastal states, including at least developed countries and small island developing states, to accept the agreement on fisheries subsidies, so that their small-scale fisheries and fishing communities can benefit. So I would be very happy to see that 2/3 of ratifications are originating from the coastal states membership of WTO, and that we need to outnumber the number of landlocked states who have accepted the agreement. So that would be a very important intent expressed from developing countries in particular, that they are in support of this agreement and how it can help their own food security and resource sustainability in the long run. Yeah, thank you very much.
Merci Sébastien. Merci d'être revenu sur la relation entre ces accords et faire un rappel des directives volontaires et tout l'intérêt qu'on peut retrouver dans ces différentes dispositions internationales au profit des communautés de pêche. Nous avons bien retenu également tout l'apport et les intérêts que cet accord de l'OMC peut apporter aux communautés si toutefois les États prennent les dispositions nécessaires et que cela peut entraîner dans la lutte contre la pauvreté. Et votre dernier appel aux pays côtiers de pouvoir adhérer et de venir à la table de négociation. Maintenant, nous allons passer à l'intervenant suivant, M. Daouda Sène. M. Daouda Sène de la Gambie, il est biologiste marin de formation. Il a toujours travaillé auprès des pêcheurs, lui-même il est pêcheur, et il est le secrétaire général de la Confédération africaine des organisations professionnelles de la pêche artisanale, la CAOPA. M. Daouda Sène, Fodesen va nous parler de l'accord de l'OMC sur l'agriculture, processus de mise en œuvre au niveau national, les défis que cela demande en termes de mise en œuvre au niveau national. Monsieur Sen, vous avez la parole pour 10 minutes.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and good afternoon to everyone, and also to my co-panelists. Aliu, can you please project my presentation if it's available with you there?
I can do it. I will do now.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much, and this is very, very important meeting or Zoom meeting, and I'm asked to really talk about issues small-scale fishing communities. As rightly mentioned, anytime I'm asked to really present about small-scale fisheries, I always want to relate it to the ecology and the biology and everything around the sea, because that's what we are talking about. And in terms of this subject matter, it gives me the thinking that we have to talk about how symbiotic is it when it comes to the WTO, because in terms of symbiosis, I think these are very important issues. And hello? Okay, I think in terms of symbiotic relationship, this is what I want to bring up, so that I think the two presenters from WTO will be able to guide us through. I think there's somebody on the background. Can I proceed? Okay, thank you. I think when I was talking about the issue of
Dauda, turn on your microphone. It's off.
Okay. So
On a muté qui, Dauda Sen?
Can you hear me now? Yes. So this is what I was saying, that I wanted to bring up this so that I think the two presenters, Florencia and his co-presenter, will be able to take us through in terms of the different symbiotic relationships that I have really want to connect it to the WTO. In terms of the different symbiotic relationships, I think we have what we call commensalism, we have mutualism, and we have parasitism. So in terms of your presentation, in the area of your presentation, I have realized that I think maybe the WTO, as far as its impact are concerned, I think here what area of this different symbiotic relationship can we really assign artisanal fishes to? Is it the commercial aspect? Is it about the parasitism or the commercialism? So this is thing that I wanted to come up with, I start with. But in terms of just to get into my presentation, I want to present on opportunities at national level. The agreement can benefit coastal communities if implemented very well. That means subsidies have to be redirected towards public goods that strengthen SSF. How can we do that? We can do that through safety at sea and cold chain facilities. There's a need also to do that through climate resilient infrastructure. Another aspect is also we can do that through co-management or collaborative management, including participatory surveillance. Another area is also SSF priorities have to be integrated in subsidy monitoring and decision making. The third one is legal protection of artisanal fishing zone from all industrial activities has to be strengthened, because there are a lot of evidence, several evidence, as far as industrial fishers and artisanal fishers are concerned. The protection of small-scale fishers is not there. And if you reference the small-scale fisheries guidelines, there is a particular paragraph or section talking about insurance of small-scale fishers. This has never happened, and it's not happening. We have not seen any signs of, artisanal fishes being brought in terms of, schemes to really protect them. This is also another aspect that we need to. And in terms of the small-scale fishes protection, there is an area in terms of, competition. There is real competition as far as small-scale fishers and industrial fishers are concerned. And when they compete, I think always the small-scale fisher is always competitively excluded because we don't have the capacity, we don't have the machinery to be able to, compete with industrial fishers. So this is something very important in terms of, small-scale protection. Next slide, please. In terms of aligning implementation with FAO SSF guidelines, subsidies should promote sustainability, equity, and gender inclusion. The FAO voluntary guideline for small-scale fishes should provide the right framework to do that. And these are the following key principles as per the as per the content of the small-scale fisheries guidelines. And one point is that it must facilitate post-harvest investment for quality and equity. This can be referred to in paragraph 7.3 of the small-scale fisheries guidelines. Promote fair and non-discriminatory trade. You can see the section 7.6. Assess impacts on nutrition and food security. That is also section or paragraph 7.7. Avoid financial measures that fuel overcapacity. Next slide, please. In the areas, in terms of national implementation checklist, what should government do? Because when you look at from the previous presenter, Florencia, everything is about government. Government should do this, government should do this. So government should define and publish list of harmful subsidies clearly. The list must be very, very clear to small-scale fishers, because we don't need the big language, the big jargons, thereby misleading the comprehension of fishermen. So we need as simple as possible. The publication should be also as simple as possible. Include small-scale fisheries organizations and women's group in subsidy monitoring committees. Very, very important. Then we'll be able to know really what is happening. Ensure transparency. WTO notifications of subsidies must be shared publicly in local languages, because when you come to the small-scale fishers, you have illiterates. Many of them are illiterates. Some of them are semi-literates, and some of them are other areas of learning. So in fact, it's important that we use the language that they know, so that comprehension is easily understood. Maintain food security safeguards in any subsidy reforms. When we talk about food security, it's very, very important that I elaborate on this. And food security has four key pillars. One pillar is food must be accessible, food must be available, food must be affordable, and food must be sustainable. So if we have a break in all the three, then sustainability will become a problem, and therefore food security will not be met. Use the fish fund and other resources to support co-management, gender disaggregated data collection, and inclusive decision making. Is important, and I will also add that effective and inclusive decision making. That's very important. Ensure that small-scale fishers have a voice in the next phase of negotiations on overcapacity and overfishing, because these are the threats to the sustainability of our fisheries sector. Next slide, please. In terms of risks to avoid, overselling the existing agreement while the most harmful subsidies for artisanal fishers persist. This is one of the risks that we need to avoid. Let's avoid overselling what we have. Misuse of WTO compliance to cut legitimate SSF support, example, infrastructure, training, and so on. Weak enforcement allowing industrial illegal fishing to continue even in the absence of subsidies. This is also very crucial and critical to look into. Future subsidies allocation prioritizing export-oriented fishing activities over local food system. We have to prioritize and give priority to local food instead of taking food to change it into fish meal, taking food and exporting it, whilst our people need that food. When we do that, I think the issue of accessibility, affordability, availability in terms of food security will not be met and it will be breached. Risks that women in the post-harvest activities are sidelined in national reforms remain are very, very important because they form the link between post-harvest and production. So the women are very, very important when it comes to the fisheries sector. Next slide, please. Some key messages, very key messages. The existing WTO agreement is a starting point. We have not gotten into a solution. This is just a beginning. So we should not be so, overwhelmed to say now everything has been signed, number of countries have done it, so a solution has already been established. No, just a beginning. Small-scale fishers must have a voice.
Monsieur Sen, veuillez conclure.
Okay, yes. Okay, small-scale fishers must have a voice in the next phase of negotiation on overcapacity and overfishing. Public funds should support livelihoods, not overcapacity. Implementation must be transparent, participatory. It must be anchored in FAO guidelines, focus on sustainability and equality. Through subsidies reform is equal to sustainability, fairness, food security for coastal communities. Thank you all for your kind attention.
Merci, Monsieur Sen, d'avoir abordé la question sous l'angle avec le regard de la pêche artisanale. Et vous avez attiré notre attention sur les opportunités au niveau national, mais si toutefois les accords sont bien mis en œuvre. Et pour que ces accords soient bien mis en œuvre, il faudrait absolument que les subventions soient réorientées vers les besoins prioritaires de la pêche artisanale. Vous avez attiré l'attention sur la concurrence déloyale et conclure sur la nécessité que les subventions fassent davantage référence et prennent racine sur les directives volontaires. Maintenant, nous allons passer la parole au dernier intervenant, M. Jonathan Werner, qui est directeur du Fonds pour la pêche de l'OMC, où il travaille avec les gouvernements et les organisations internationales pour faire progresser la mise en œuvre de l'accord sur les subventions à la pêche. Il a rejoint le cadre intégré renforcé de l'OMC en 2012. Donc, nous allons pouvoir profiter de son expérience depuis 2012 dans cet environnement pour nous faire la présentation suivante sur les accords, sur la mise en œuvre. Monsieur Jonathan, vous avez la parole.
Oui, merci. Thank you. Do you see my screen?
We do.
Okay, perfect. So I will do my best to be on time. First of all, it is an absolute pleasure to be here. It's very nice. it's a blessing and a curse to be the last one to speak because everybody is tired, but it's also a blessing because I have the pleasure of segueing into questions, and in the spirit of what the illustrious moderator has said, I will be as fast as possible and efficient as possible in introducing the fish fund in the spirit that we can have more time for questions. So my name is Jonathan, and I am the manager of the Fish Fund. The Fish Fund was established as, I'm not going to get into a lot of details because actually colleagues that presented before have also mentioned the fund. Just very briefly, it was set up. It was the idea came about in 2022 when the negotiations for what we call Fish One were completed, and we spent the last couple of years really trying to set up the fund, and through a very inclusive process, which I can share more details. The most important thing, though, is that we have all developing and LDC WTO members that deposit their instruments have access to the fund. We currently have 18 million, a little bit over $18 million. We closed the first call for proposals. I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slides. The objectives of the fund, not to be repetitive, but as was mentioned before, is really to support members to meet their commitments under the Agreement on Fisheries Subsidies. And in a very practical way, this is going to be done through delivery of technical assistance and capacity building. Mr. Sain from the Gambia mentioned, and I thank him for it, making good use of the fish fund. The Gambia currently sits as a member of the steering committee and has been a very active and pivotal member as well. So the idea is to really provide hands-on support to members to integrate fisheries related elements into their subsidy policies. How the Fish Fund is already doing this through two types of grants. The first one is a project preparation grant, and the second is an actual project grant for bigger scale interventions. This is really supported as a partnership. Myself and my colleagues were housed here at the WTO Secretariat, but we work very closely with the World Bank, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and IFAD, providing support to members. The whole idea is that the membership and those governments that have deposited their instrument have easy access to the fund. Now, these eligible members, as I mentioned before, have access to two categories of funding. The first one is called Creatively Category 1, which really supports two types of projects. The first is to formulate, to engage in needs assessments, much like there are several instruments. IISD is one of them, but there are several consultancies and methodologies to kind of engage in this in this X-ray of understanding what public administrations need to do to make themselves compliant with the agreement. These are funding windows of up to $50,000, and the second funding window goes up to $300,000, and they are designed for members to have access to broadly four types of interventions: improving fisheries management systems, engaging in data collection for stock assessments, then something else that was mentioned, which is legislative updates and support, institutional support, and capacity building and training in other in areas needed to implement the agreement. Now, I mentioned that we just closed last month the very first call for proposals on the 9th of October. We have developed institutional material that we are more than happy to share with you in all 3 WTO languages that you can share with colleagues that really show you how easy it is to access funding. So my colleagues and I are in the secretariat. We are instructed by members to launch the call for proposals. Then there is a period where submissions and applications are sent, and a significant part of my job and of the job of my colleagues is to support members, governments to formulate and guide the application process. There's a period of review of these applications, and then there's a committee, a technical committee composed by the World Bank, the WTO, IFAD, and FAO that provides technical evaluation of these applications. And that is the period that we just finished. And then now we're going to have in the next 2 weeks the first steering committee meeting, which will evaluate these applications. And to give you I know there are a lot of people in the call, and what I can say is we received a lot of applications. We received applications of around close to 100 applications. Not all of them were eligible, because you need to have deposited your instrument. Applications need to be complete. They need the budget. They need a specific form. But it was really the first time we did this, and it has thus far been very successful. So part of my agenda here is to ensure that you have the contact and you have whatever you need to then, for the next call for proposals, which is still undefined, but probably in the beginning of 2026, have access to the fund. Now, what I provided here, and I know we are a little bit pressed for time, but what I provided here, I don't have to go through all of it, but they are concrete examples of applications and funding requests. So here, what you see here on your screen is the 50,000 for lower cost support and needs assessment type support for Windows, right? So here you see a very concrete. This is an illustrative example, right? Something else that you have access to is to use this $50,000 to draft and engage either a consultant or mobilize additional resources to write proposals and have access to the $300,000 windows. And here you have access to this presentation. So here providing very concrete examples, right, of a specific outcome, tailoring the strengthening of sustainable fisheries management system, right? And then what is expected, what type of output, examples of specific activities. We've also put specific examples on all the 5 categories that you can actually apply for, right? So we will share this, we are here to provide you with guidance and really engage in a process of what you need and how we can support. Now, one important thing is that the fund is access through to WTO members, and so the idea is that small scale fishers and class associations and however there are representations, they can they can engage their government agencies, the ministries of fisheries, or whatever agency is responsible for the topic, and that is how I would imagine small-scale fishers would have access to types of support by engaging with the governments, right? Just before I wrap up, we have a dedicated website where you can find more information. You can access, you can contact us, and we are also more than happy to give you institutional material that explains a little bit what we do and how we support members. So you can email me, but you can also access the website and email the secretariat, and we will be more than happy to set up a call and see how we can best help and tailor support. So I know this was a little bit quick,
Merci,
but
Jonathan.
10 minutes, yeah. Okay.
Merci, Jonathan, pour ces clarifications sur les procédures concernant le fonds. Et surtout, nous saluons votre disponibilité, la disponibilité de l'équipe pour appuyer ceux qui en feront un appel, qui répondront à ces différents appels pour les différentes catégories de fonds. Et nous espérons également que les documents promis seront partagés et facilités également aux pêcheurs artisanaux et à leurs organisations qui sont intéressés, les États, de pouvoir travailler pour répondre à ces appels. Maintenant, nous allons passer aux questions-réponses. Nous avions prévu 30 minutes de questions-réponses, mais vu le timing, je pense que nous allons réduire la durée. Nous allons faire une quinzaine de minutes pour des questions-réponses avant de pouvoir faire une synthèse. La première question est posée par Sandra Sekana Sarma. Il parle de l'article 5 sur les provisions de l'accord de l'OMC, surtout de l'accord BBNJ. Je pense que c'est il n'a pas précisé à qui il a posé la question. La deuxième, c'est Laï Camara qui demande: est-ce que la Convention prend en compte le volet aquaculture? Ensuite, Aruna Lebay de la Mauritanie: est-ce que vous parlez des subventions, de suspendre les subventions pour la pêche artisanale? Docteur Diagagay qui dit que overselling the existing agreement is a high risk when it comes to the interests of SSF in sub-Saharan Africa. Je pense que c'est la surpêche, la menace que représente la surpêche, la surcapacité pour ce qui est de la pêche en Afrique subsaharienne. Je donne la parole à Sivaja par rapport à certaines questions et à Margot pour pouvoir avoir plus de précision sur les questions. Merci à vous.
Sure. Thank you, Mbao. Thank you, Mbao. Maybe I can also reiterate a few of the questions from the chat box. So there was a question from Mr. Chandrasekhar Sharma. His question is whether the Article 5B in conjunction with the provisions of BBNJ agreement. I would like to put forward the question to the panelists. Would any of you be interested to answer the question? Looking at the linkages between the WTO Fisheries Subsidy Agreement and the BBNJ agreement.
Sivaja, I'm happy
Yes, please.
I'm happy to give a few words on that. So there is no formal link in that Article 5 is a standalone provision or a group of standalone provisions and doesn't reference the High Seas BBNJ treaty as such. Now there is clearly two objectives here that go in the same direction, right? Which is the protection and the introduction of better conservation approaches when it comes to areas beyond national jurisdiction. And you can see them as very complementary, and I will perhaps just end with that. Because one of the objectives in the BBNG treaty is obviously to cover more and more areas of the high seas with marine protected areas. And the WTO provision, the one on unregulated high seas fishing, applies in the opposite cases where you have absolutely no sort of management or no sort of rule on those areas. So it can be seen as a first step pending the establishment of fisheries management or some sort of management that would ensure sustainable exploitation of fisheries, or even the prohibition from fishing a particular area. When you don't have that, what you have in the WTO agreement is an actual first step, right? If we do not have any mechanism to ensure we are exploiting those fisheries sustainably, then at least we should not be using public money, taxpayers' money, to encourage more fishing in those areas. So it can be perceived as a first step, I would say, from that perspective.
Thank you so much, Tristan. So right now we also have question from Juan Lechuga. Over to you, Juan. Please make it brief.
Yeah, we'll make it very brief. And it's just like every time that one of the questions that comes to mind when I think about this particular agreement and small-scale fisheries is, in particular, for example, the subsidies on fuel, which many small-scale fisheries rely on, like for their activity. And it comes to mind, like, for example, in West Africa, like in the case of the fishery of the Sardinel, which is quite which the stock is in dear condition, or the Mediterranean, there's a multi-species fishery, and also many small-scale fishers rely on that. So how, like, for example, these subsidies that subsidize small-scale fisheries that target overfish stocks, how will we address that? And knowing that these small-scale fishers rely on those kind of subsidies to maintain to make even their activities somehow profitable. I mean, there's subsidies that will need to be taken into consideration, and we need to address very carefully how we address, like, for example, those kind of subsidies when it really impacts on the ground small-scale fishers, and therefore how would we like, for example, phase out from those subsidies while like supporting these small-scale fishers, as, for example, Sebastian has mentioned in his presentation, with other like with support for their livelihoods and so on.
Thanks, Juan. Sebastian, would you like to answer?
Well, Juan, I didn't fully get the gist of your question. Are you talking about fuel subsidies and how it is to be dealt with?
Yeah, because many small-scale fishers rely on those, like, to make the activity somehow profitable in cases of overexploitation. If, for example, by the agreement, though we have to phase out from those subsidies to small-scale fishers, then how can we support them in order, like, to not impact them so negatively if we are going to phase out of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think one way to look at fuel subsidies is to talk about alternative, fishing based on electrofishing, for example, not batteries charged, or not necessarily petroleum products. So I think this is now feasible. Many small-scale vessels are using this kind of motorized operations, and it is one way of doing it. And the second thing is to also talk about the resource management. So fuel subsidy in the context of overcapacity, overfishing, will be problematic. But if it is within a fairly well-managed fishery, I think that perhaps would come in fish 2 that Tristan presented at the beginning. So therefore, I think in the context of that, one can try to see within the framework of effective fisheries management, how do you look at fuel subsidies? Perhaps it can be seen differently from the way you look at fuel subsidies in relation to IUU fishing, overfish stocks, so on and so forth. And I would also quickly go back to the first question, and I would like to also draw attention to the UN Fish Stocks Agreement, which is also a subset of the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, although it is a UN fisheries agreement, and RFMOs are in charge of that. So therefore, some elements of the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction through the UN Fish Stocks Agreement are coming within the purview of the subsidies agreement. So therefore, we should also recognize the fact that there is a very strong mention of RFMOs within the agreement, and that can definitely help some of the stocks which are straddling and highly migratory stocks, management of those stocks beyond national jurisdiction coming within the purview of this agreement. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Now we have another question from Taiwo Are. The question is, how can we access the countries that have deposited their instruments with WTO, and when is the next window for the fundings? Jonathan, would you like to answer that question?
Absolutely. Thank you. So we just closed the first call for proposals, and we don't have a specific date yet. But the steering committee is meeting in 2 weeks, and one of the items in the agenda is the opening of the next call for proposals. And I would expect the call for proposals to be set for early 2026. The idea of the steering committee is that there will be at least 2 call for proposals per year. One would range between January and May, so to speak, and the other one between August and October, something like that. So it would be around a 3-4 month period where it's open, and then the current target, there was an initial target of $5 million of support per year divided into these 2. But let's see how things are. So the specifics, there isn't a date yet, but it will be in the beginning, most likely in the beginning of 2026. And we will then disseminate information, and we're happy we do this through the website, and we'll soon sort of set up a mailing list. But we will let you know, and you can disseminate this information to your respective mailing lists.
Thank you, Jonathan. There are also a couple of questions in the chat box. If you could, if the speakers could type in their answers, that would also be great while we go through the questions online. So we got another question from Aliyu. Aliyu, please go ahead. Aliyu, so please go ahead with your question.
All right, thank you very much. It's a pleasure for this very important session. My concern and my question perhaps goes to Dauda or any of the speakers regarding the role of government within the small-scale fisheries countries. How do we link as far as the WTO is concerned? Because I've been attending the WTO on 2 occasions, but I can see sometimes even the government representatives do not have opportunity to meet with the small-scale fishers either during at the side events or in other major events. So what do we think now will be the next prospects for small-scale fishers as far as the role of government in subsidy implementation is concerned? My second point is how can small-scale fishers still be very much involved and aware locally at grassroots level in terms of the importance of subsidies? And somebody talked about how can we use public money, how can we use taxpayers' money, all right, and at the expense of these very small-scale fishers in supporting either multilateral corporations or supporting subsidies to other entities. So that's basically what I want to do, then to thank the organizers of this very important session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aliyu. Mr. Dawda, would you like to answer that, respond to that question?
Let me try, and then perhaps others will come in. Yes, thank you very much, Ali, for that question. And I think you are right when it comes to WTO issues and negotiations. I think small-scale fishers know little or even nothing about WTO arrangements, agreements, and processes. So with reference to your question, I will say there should be, we have the government, the different countries has to deepen their engagement when it comes to WTO issues. Because in the Gambia, I once participated during the validation of the first, trade $50,000 that was Gambia developed it through the Ministry of Trade. But apart from that, I have never had any engagement, any awareness creation, any sensitization when it comes to WTO. So my answer to your question, even to compound all your question, is that there must be engagement as far as WTO issues are concerned in the Gambia and even other countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawda. And Florencia, probably there is another question for you from Idrissa Kallo. The question is, how can we ensure in practice that the WTO Agreement on Fisheries Subsidies clearly distinguishes between harmful subsidies and support subsidies that are necessary for the security, resilience, and survival of small-scale fisheries in developing countries? Florencia, would you like to respond to the question?
Sure, I can attempt, and then if needed, my colleague Tristan can complement. I was trying to find the question in the chat, but I think, I mean, it will all come to the second part of the negotiations, and I wanted to make a clarification that as of now, under the agreement, there is no specific prohibition of, for instance, subsidies to fuel. The prohibition is to grant subsidies when there's specific situation of overfish stocks or the operator has been engaged in IUU fishing. So as of now, there are not specific subsidies that are currently being prohibited. So I think the importance will come up with the Fish 2 negotiations. And Tristan, I don't know if you want to complement.
I must admit I did not hear the second part of the question, Sivaja.
So the question was, how can we ensure that the agreement clearly distinguish between harmful subsidies and support subsidies that are necessary for the security, resilience, and survival of small-scale fisheries in developing countries?
Yeah, so I mean, to me, quick answer to that is that the current agreement, Fish 1, is really focused on subsidies in situations that WTO members, as a body, 164 at the time it was concluded, unequivocally agreed that those situations are harmful, and so fishing should not be supported in those cases, right? When there is a clearly identified case of IUU fishing, no government has an interest in subsidizing fishing. When a stock is overfished and there are no management measures to rebuild that stock, members decided by concluding this agreement that it is a situation where subsidies should not be provided because it's just too risky for sustainability and for all those who rely on fish resources for the livelihoods, for income, for food security. So I believe the approach was by defining not the types of subsidies, but the situations in which they are provided and agreeing on situations where everybody, all members agreed it would be harmful to provide subsidies.
Thank you, Tristan. We have Mustafa here. Mustafa, please go ahead with your question.
Bonjour et merci beaucoup. Ma préoccupation est de savoir est-ce que nous parlons donc des mêmes pêcheries artisanales. En Afrique de l'Ouest, quand nous avons des pêcheries artisanales qui assurent près de 70% des débarquements, des centaines de milliers de tonnes, des pêcheurs artisanaux essentiellement orientés vers le marché international et qui présentent les mêmes
Monsieur Dem,
caractéristiques.
on ne vous entend pas.
Allô? Vous m'entendez? Allô? Vous m'entendez maintenant?
Allô?
Enfin. Allô?
Parfaitement. Hein? On entend
Oui,
parfaitement.
D'accord,
Oui.
je disais donc
Oui.
tantôt que est-ce qu'on parle des mêmes pêcheries artisanales? En Afrique de l'Ouest, nous avons des pêcheries artisanales qui assurent 60 à 70% des débarquements, des centaines de milliers de tonnes, des pêcheries artisanales essentiellement orientés vers le marché international au détriment du marché local, des pêcheries artisanales qui présentent quasiment les mêmes caractéristiques que les pêcheries semi-industrielles et même les pêcheries industrielles côtières. Est-ce qu'aujourd'hui, dans le contexte actuel, on peut vraiment parler de pêche artisanale? De quelle pêche artisanale vous parlez exactement? Et est-ce qu'on peut, dans le contexte actuel de surexploitation de l'ensemble des stocks, peut-on encore continuer à parler de subventions, de soutien financier pour ces pêcheurs artisanales? Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Mustafa. And along with that, maybe I'll also add one more question from the chat box. Where can SSF benefit from the fisheries fund and from which angle? So we have two questions. Maybe any of the speakers could respond to the question and we could conclude because we are on time.
Yeah, Shivja, I think it's a
Yes.
very good question, and I think there should be some ring fencing of the kind of small scale fisheries that we would like to support, and the small scale fisheries which should be treated at par with other type of fishing operations. So therefore, I think it's a good opportunity for countries to see what type of rudimentary small scale fishing needs support. And then what kind of small scale fishing, which are semi-industrial, should be treated at par with other type of fishing operations. So therefore, we need to take that call in the context of this. And in light of this, it'll be very interesting to know if the Fish Fund, for example, is assisting countries to put together a review mechanism in a multi-stakeholder kind of a process. And then those kind of processes can discuss how to define, how to exclude, how to include, what type of small-scale fishing should be considered. I think it'll be important in that context to see if countries can be encouraged to use this fund to think about this kind of slightly complex issues and how to arrive at a kind of a position which can benefit everybody in our move towards sustainable and responsible fishing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe if I can jump in and complement and address. So I think that is exactly the spirit, what Sebastian mentioned. We just finished the first call for proposals, so it's not like we have a we are still going through this process for the first time, and I can say we received several different proposals. We are not the decision makers. We are a secretariat that is helping and guiding this process. We have received some proposals that have elements exactly what you mentioned, Sebastian, like including stakeholder engagement on very broad based and with bringing together several different actors. It is bringing together different stakeholders and being having a very inclusive approach to the projects is one of the solid criteria that have been established by the steering committee, which is composed not only of donors but also in equal number of beneficiaries. So it's I can say that these criteria have not been taken lightly, and we will see how this discussion evolves. But the spirit is very much what you described. Now, on specifics of access, in addition to what I said, we don't have a specific date yet for the second call for proposals, but it should happen in the next few months. And we are more than happy to be in touch with several different organizations or if specific members want us to be put in a mailing list and be let know, we're also more than happy to do that. So this is how you get access. And all the material, by the way, the forms, the templates, the frequently asked questions, they're all on our website, WTO fishfund.org.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jonathan. This has been a very important and inspiring exchange. Maybe to conclude, we have a representative from CAOPA. I would like to invite you to conclude the session so briefly, maybe possibly within a minute's time. Do we have Jellicoe too? Haidara here?
Merci. Nous allons donner la parole à Jalikatou pour 2 minutes. C'est une jeune femme transformatrice, vendeuse de poissons et de la Guinée qui était engagée dans l'autonomisation des femmes et qui est membre de la cellule des jeunes de la CAOPA. Vu le temps, Jalikatou, nous vous demandons de faire une très brève conclusion. Merci.
Merci, bonsoir tout le monde. Merci, Monsieur Mbao. Allô, vous m'entendez?
Oui, on vous entend bien. Allez-y vite.
Alors que nous arrivons au terme de ce webinaire, reconnaissons que l'accord engagé par l'OMFC sur les subventions à la pêche constitue un progrès, mais un progrès partiel. Comme les intervenants l'ont rappelé, il s'attaque aux subventions à la pêche illégale, non déclarée et non réglementée, aux subventions à la pêche qui opèrent sur des stocks surexploités et à la pêche non réglementée en haute mer. Cependant, il reste encore à s'attaquer aux subventions véritablement problématiques pour nous, les communautés de pêche artisanale. Celles qui soutiennent les surcapacités de la pêche industrielle, financées par des fonds publics qui alimentent la surpêche et menacent notre avenir. Le coût humain de ces subventions néfastes a également été évoqué. La pression sur les communautés côtières africaines, la diminution des prises locales et des difficultés rencontrées par les femmes dans les activités de transformation et de commercialisation. Les règles de l'OMC en matière de subvention doivent protéger nos moyens de subsistance et la sécurité alimentaire de nos concitoyens. Pour la CAOPA, la voie à suivre est claire. Les travailleurs de la pêche artisanale, hommes et femmes, doivent être reconnus comme les acteurs légitimes dans tous les processus, tant au niveau de l'OMC qu'au niveau national. Concernant la mise en œuvre de l'accord actuel sur les subventions à la pêche, ainsi que les négociations en cours sur les subventions qui favorisent la surcapacité de la pêche, de la surpêche, les membres de l'OMC doivent achever les négociations et adopter des règles contraignantes sur la surcapacité et sur la surpêche, en dialogue avec les communautés. Cette participation de la pêche artisanale doit être réelle et significative et non symbolique. Pour cela, la première condition, c'est la transparence totale sur les subventions pour les populations. Cela veut dire rendre les informations sur les subventions accessibles dans les langues locales. La notification obligatoire des subventions octroyées par les États doit servir de redevabilité envers les citoyens et les communautés de pêche artisanale. Cela ne doit pas être seulement une transparence envers les bureaux de l'OMC à Genève. Beaucoup ont insisté sur la nécessité de réforme des systèmes de subvention au bénéfice de la pêche artisanale. Cette réforme doit être ancrée dans les directives volontaires de la FAO pour la pêche artisanale durable. Ces directives nous rappellent que les fonds publics doivent récompenser la gestion responsable et non l'exploitation à l'outrance que les subventions doivent promouvoir. L'équité, la sécurité alimentaire et la durabilité. Et que le commerce du poisson soit au profit des femmes, aux jeunes et de générations futures. Une réforme des subventions à la pêche qui soutient la mise en œuvre des directives pour la pêche artisanale permettra à nos pays de contribuer aux questions de développement durable sur lequel nos États se sont accroyés, notamment l'élimination de la pauvreté, l'ODD 1, l'égalité entre les genres, l'ODD 5, le travail décent et la croissance économique. La consommation et la production responsable, ODD 12, et la vie aquatique, ODD 14. Dans le cadre d'une telle réforme, il faut que le Fonds pour la pêche de l'OMC bénéficie aux pêcheurs artisanaux, afin de soutenir la cogestion, la sécurité en mer, l'égalité de genre et la valorisation locale des produits, et non l'expansion industrielle au niveau de nos côtes. La CAOPA appelle donc les gouvernements à protéger et renforcer les subventions qui améliorent la résilience des communautés dépendantes de la pêche et éliminer celles qui nuisent nos écosystèmes. Je conclurai par un message venu du cœur. L'accord de l'OMC sur les subventions de la pêche ne doit pas légitimer les injustices que les pêcheurs, artisans et les femmes de la pêche subissent depuis des décennies. Il doit devenir un instrument pour les corriger. La CAOPA est prête à travailler avec les partenaires, les gouvernements, l'OMC, les bailleurs, les ONG, afin que cette réforme des subventions de la pêche soit véritablement transformatrice et qu'elle garantisse l'équité, l'inclusion et la durabilité pour toutes celles qui dépendent de la pêche pour y vivre. Je vous remercie.
Merci Jalikatou. Merci tous les intervenants d'avoir accepté l'invitation qui vous a été faite pour partager votre connaissance des accords de l'OMC. Nous demandons à ceux qui ont encore des questions d'envoyer des mails pour recevoir des réponses. Personnellement, je remercie CAPE et la CAOPA de m'avoir désigné comme modérateur avec Sivaja Ner, et au nom de la CAOPA, le président Gaussou Gueye remercie tout le monde. Merci à vous, Sivaja.